I'm going to be honest with you guys. For the past few months, I've really been getting into the James Bond films. I'm in the middle of watching them all the way through, and as of writing this, I'm up to For Your Eyes Only. But out of all the ones I've watched so far, only two have really stood out for me. The first one being Goldfinger, but it seems that everyone has talked about that one already, and how it's pretty much the blueprint of James Bond films. So the second one, the one I'm going to talk about, is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the sixth installment in the franchise. To me, this is the one that stands out from all the James Bond films, when looking at all of them individually. I'm not just saying that because of the fact it had a Bond that was there for one film and that was it. What I'm saying is that if you look at all the aspects of this film and place them all together, you can clearly see that it's by far the most different and unique Bond film of the franchise, by a long shot. Heck, I'd go as far as to say it's the most experimental of the franchise, which some of you may be wondering. What do you mean by experimental? Well, if we just quickly type it in here, we can see it says new inventions, ideas and untested techniques that are either trial and error or not yet established. So how does On Her Majesty's have experimental filmmaking techniques? Well, the first reason is really easy to explain. Yeah, that's right. New actor. It's hard to wrap this around our heads now, because today we have 6 different actors who have played James Bond, and we're currently waiting on our 7th. But to have a new actor play the same character for a franchise as big as James Bond was unheard of for the time. Obviously Connery didn't return for a 6th Bond film, yet, because he hated the media attention involved with being the star of the films, so they got an unknown, actually very unknown, George Lazenby. I say that because this was his first acting job ever, simply because he wasn't an actor. He was an Australian model obsessed with the idea of playing James Bond. Then you're probably wondering, how did he even get the job in the first place? Well, just watch this small clip. From what Lazenby described, it seems that anyone could have been James Bond after Connery left. But Lazenby being an unknown may have actually been the only time in which the Bond girl was more recognisable than Bond himself, with the late Diana Rigg, who was known for playing Emma Peel in The Avengers, the TV show, not the film. From what I know, the only case before and after this, where this could also be the case, is maybe Halle Berry in Die Another Day, and even then that's a stretch. But because of the star system in Hollywood that was slowly fading, but still around, there would definitely be a lot more people who wanted to see Diana Rigg rather than George Lazenby. Again, mainly because this was Lazenby's first film. And from what I've seen, read and heard from reviews of this film, this casting choice seemed to pay off. Whenever someone asks who's the best Bond girl across all the Bond films, Diana Rigg's Tracy always seems to rank very highly, which I'll talk about why she ranks so highly later. But the final actor I want to talk about is Telly Savalas, as just like Lazenby, he replaced an already established character, that being Ernst Blofeld. Even though this was technically the third interpretation of the character, the first time he appeared, being played by Anthony Dawson, his face wasn't shown, so it's easy to forget that he was in From Russia with Love and Thunderball. And this is why most people believe that Donald Pleasence's performance was the first for the character, and Savalas's was the second. And with that, we had the first time the main villain of a Bond film returned as the main villain again. And if I'm not mistaken, Blofeld is the only main villain in the franchise to return as a main villain on numerous occasions, with On Her Majesty's and Spectre being examples of this, but it was On Her Majesty's that made this possible. So props to that. Even first-timers on a Bond film aren't just confined to actors. As for the director, Peter Hunt, not only was he the 4th person to direct a Bond film, but this was his first film he ever directed. Surprisingly, he was involved with every Bond movie up until this point, either working as a second unit director or an editor, which, even if an editor suddenly directed a film in a major franchise for the first time today, would be obscure. Just imagine the editor for No Way Home. Wait, who's the editor for that film? Okay, so going off IMDb, it's these two. So just imagine one of them directing Spider-Man 4. Hope that was helpful. In fact, I go as far as to say that Peter Hunt's directorial style brought in so many unique moments in this film that no Bond film before it had, such as its focus on the fight choreography. I'm going to use the final fight in Dr. No as an example here, and compare it to the hotel fight scene in On Her Majesty's, just so you can understand what I mean. With the Dr. No fight, the punches and attacks are slower, and the editing is not slow, but not fast either, along with the cinematography being wide shots so you can see the full fight play out. This could not be more different than the hotel fight, as the editing is extremely fast paced, and the fight choreography is more than just punching. There's kicking, throwing objects, Lazenby and the assassin being knocked down multiple times, along with the fight scene happening completely out of nowhere, in order to grab your attention from the start. Adding all this up makes this fight scene, to me, one of the most memorable in the franchise. I would also say the lack of music is also unique to the franchise instead of using music, but we've already seen this in the Bond vs Oddjob fight in Goldfinger. But what I would say is that the fight scene in On Her Majesty's Secret Service has a lot more sound effects compared to the Oddjob fight, which at some points is just footstep sounds.
I'll see myself out.
Because as I said before, the fight scenes before this movie were quite slow. So with the hotel fight, the amount of sound effects is actually impressive. Somewhat on the same category to do with sound, but the Bond theme to this day is the only one that returned to a score, composed by John Barry instead of using an original song. The last time a score was used for a title sequence instead of an original song was from Russia with Love, and I know what some of you may think, but Matt Monro's From Russia with Love is technically not a Bond theme, so the more you know. There's also so many little stuff in the story and filmmaking aspects that, up until that point, we've never seen in Bond films. Examples in this can be seen in the cinematography and how it uses techniques that, even for 1969, were uncommon. A brilliant little example of this is when Draco looks at the knife that Bond threw beside him. The switch in focus, not when Draco turns around, but when he puts his glasses on, and the switch back to the original focus when he takes his glasses off, is a great example of how the cinematography in the movie attempts techniques that have yet to be tested in the Bond franchise. There's also this Dutch angle during the ice rink car chase that keeps the audience on its feet, because as the saying goes, the little stuff adds up. Even the scenes where skiing is involved are filmed with POV shots, therefore enhancing the viewing experience for the viewers. Sure, films like Thunderball during the final fight scene have the actors actually underwater, but they're all filmed in wide shots, which gives us the scope of the scene, but not the experience of what fighting with spears underwater would be like. In fact, the skiing sequence in The Spy Who Loved Me also utilised the technique of having POV shots of bad guys chasing Bond, showing the influence of Majesty's techniques in later Bond films. When it comes to the story and plot points, there are numerous established tropes that they decided to implement in this film, such as not paying much attention to the gadgets. We can see this very clearly due to the fact that Desmond Llewellyn, I hope I'm saying that right, who plays Q, is barely in this film. And outside the open scene with M, and the when scene at the end, that's all the screen time he has. This does make Q's character somewhat pointless in this film, but does show off more gadgets than there normally are in individual Bond films. Whilst they don't establish the gadgets before they were used, they rather float towards show and not telling in this movie, with gadgets such as the miniature camera and the door opener, which do seem like basic gadgets that Bond should have on him at all times. Even the main aim of trying to stop the bad guy is way more complex than the previous Bond films, which normally relies on stopping the bad guys from causing a huge explosion, such as in You Only Live Twice and Thunderball. However, Blofeld's evil plot consists of brainwashing 12 women into distributing bacteriological warfare agents across the world. See what I mean? We went from stop the bad guy and then another stop the bad guy, but with this we got stop the bad guy, but with extra steps. This alone just shows how convoluted the plot is. Heck, even for the first time in the Bond franchise, Bond has a leave of absence, which may not seem much on the surface, but it brings a sense of realism to the film that definitely seemed to continue. Okay, maybe not, but let's carry on. The final thing I want to mention that's experimental is the ending, because of how unique and carefully crafted it is. The first reason this is unique is because this is the first main Bond girl to be killed off. They've killed off Bond girls before, such as Jill and Tilly Masterson in Goldfinger. However, there's one clear difference between them and Tracy, and that's the screen time. In Goldfinger, Jill is only in the film for the first 15-20 minutes, and her sister has, I believe, even less during the middle of the film. Meaning when they do get killed off, it's more out of shock instead of an emotional connection to the characters. Compare this to Tracy, who has an extremely large amount of screen time. So much in fact that we feel like we witnessed her entire life before she unfortunately gets killed. She even gets married to Bond just before her death, the only time throughout the films in which he marries someone. And this here is where the Bond franchise would never be the same, because this killed the trope that all the Bond films would end with Bond and the Bond girl of that respective film living happily ever after. Here, it's bleak, in reality, and like a freeze frame in time, fully letting the audience take in the moment that's just taken place. And it's probably the only time across all the Bond films in which the villain wins. Sure, Blofeld doesn't have his lair or his henchmen, but like the previous Blofeld in You Only Live Twice, he could easily just go off and create another evil lair. With the death of Tracy, Bond can't just go off and find another woman immediately, despite his womanizing status. When I was showing my brother this script, he's a massive James Bond fan by the way, he said a point to me that I think perfectly explains Bond's emotional reaction at the end. It wasn't Tracy who needed Bond, it was Bond who needed Tracy. This can be seen not just with the ending, but throughout the film, like when Bond's trying to escape Blofeld's henchmen through the village, and he sits down, and for the first time in the franchise, looks unsure and uncertain of what to do. But who is it that comes out of nowhere to save him? Of course, it's Tracy. And with his new life instantly taken away from him, there's nothing for Bond to do but to go back to MI6, while cementing a rule about Bond's character that is so hard-hitting, and that is, Bond can never truly find love. And with him crying over his wife's corpse, the movie ends after 2 hours and 20 minutes, which to that time was the longest Bond film for a fair bit. Before that, only one of Connery's films clocked in at over 2 hours, and the next Bond film that surpassed on Her Majesty's runtime was Casino Royale, 37 years later. So yeah, that's why On Her Majesty's Secret Service is experimental. Out of all the Bond films I've watched in order, this is probably my favourite, simply because of how unique it is. And that ending is probably one of my top 10 endings of all time, because of how well it's executed. Sure, there's some things in the film that aren't the best, like the constant change from green screen to shot on location during the skiing and bobsled scenes. But since it's not entirely green screen and it's from 1968, I think I can give it a pass. I can't wait to watch the other Bond films. In fact, I've got a ranking on Letterboxd that I'm in the middle of creating. So if you're somehow interested, feel free to take a look. Or not, I don't know, I'm not forcing you. I also can't wait to watch Dalton's films and GoldenEye, as my brother says they're some of the best films in the franchise, as he is a really big Bond fan. Like really big. Like when he gets injected with the films, just like how Jason Statham gets injected with electricity and crank.